Okay, today it's about calculated service metrics. You may wonder, it was called custom service metrics in the past. We renamed it to calculated service metrics. And there's a good reason for that, which you probably understand as I go through the presentation. Now let me dig into what is this really all about. Dynatrace, we have a lot of data, as you know, right? We are doing end-to-end distributed tracing with the PurePath technology, and we have a lot of great out-of-the-box dashboards that give you access to this data in an ad hoc basis through the UI. We also have REST APIs to give you data, but you always came back and asking, so what if I want to get access and chart the, let's say, response time, failure rate, throughput, the number of database statements being executed for individual tests, because we have the capability to integrate with your testing tools where tests can, for instance, pass on test names, step names as request attributes. So how can we do all this? You also ask, well, we have Dynatrace provides this great capability of MDA, multidimensional analysis, but it's all ad hoc. How can I put it on a dashboard? How can I get it through an API? And these are the requirements that the product team has listened to and has now implemented what they call calculated service metrics. That means we can define, or you can define, additional metrics on your services that get calculated just as all the other out-of-the-box metrics that we have, but you are much more flexible in doing things like splitting on particular metadata, and you can also select from a wide variety of metrics that we want to base this on. So as you can see on the bottom here, some of the screenshots, what are the top 10 business transactions split by endpoint of your particular application? That's not possible. Or give me the response time based on my tests. Test names like invoke, homepage, echo, version, basic check. These are all requests that came in from testing tools. That's not possible. Now, a little recap for those people that might be new with Dynatrace. So what you get out of the box with Dynatrace is when you install Dynatrace, you get full stack monitoring. It means Dynatrace automatically detects your hosts, your processes, and your services. And on the services, you automatically get all the key metrics like response time, failure rate, throughput. All this stuff is all there for you. Now, we can also chart all of these metrics. That's not a problem, right? But you are, just say, a little limited on things like I want to chart it per individual URL, or I want to chart it on a particular endpoint. But by default, this is what you get. So now, how about, to actually answer this question, how about charting response time of, let's say, the top X requests of the last hour? You know that in Dynatrace, on the individual service views, we have a view that actually is called top requests. And you can click on them and you get the overview, but when you click on them, it all gets basically calculated ad hoc at that time. And there was no API for that to actually query the data to get time series. Well, now there is. So what we now have, different links in the product to make this easier, but one of them that I will show you later on is you can actually start on the service screen. You can click on Create Chart, and then you get into the new multidimensional analysis view, where you can actually say, you know what, Dynatrace, I want to see a particular metric, let's say response time. I want to split it by, let's say, the request name or by the URI or any other custom attribute. And I want to do this, I want to get this data for, let's say, dynamic requests, so you can filter, or for particular service types, maybe only for HTTP GETs or POSTs, maybe only those requests that had a failure or that made a database call. You can do all that in the multidimensional analysis. And then not only can you see this in this new view, you can also click on Create Metric, which means Dynatrace will automatically create a time series metric that from that point on will automatically be calculated for new transactions, for new pure paths that are coming in, which means you can then also put them on a dashboard, right? Dashboards like this are now possible. Show me, let's say, the top 10 transactions. Give me the response time, the failure rate. Give me the number of database statements. There's a lot of things possible, okay? So that's something we now give to you. I want to give you some additional examples, because these are things that we've heard from folks that have used the already really awesome, capability to do ad hoc diagnostics. I'm pretty sure you've all experienced that in the different views. You could do multidimensional filtering. Like in this case, give me all the HTTP post requests on a particular URL that, let's say, take longer than 100 milliseconds, and then split it by URL. Right? And this was already possible, again, as an ad hoc multidimensional analysis, But now you can create a so-called calculate service metric. That means you can say, Dynatrace, I want you to calculate this particular data, make it available as a so-called calculated service metrics, which means you can then also put it on a dashboard. And here's some examples. Right? It goes far beyond just response time metrics. If you look at this, we actually look at things like estimated revenue per destination, looking at our easy travel example. So we're actually not only looking at response time, but we can also use a metric such as revenue or anything else that is captured along the distributed trace as a request attribute. We can also use that as a metric, and then we can filter it, and obviously we can split it by anything else along these transactions. So just some examples. We will actually walk through the loyalty example here in a second. Another example, because I wanted to give you folks a little idea on what else is possible, technical KPIs. So what about, let's say, those HTTP posts on your web service endpoints that are returning HTTP 200, but that make more than one backend call from a particular URL, right? Again, in Dynatrace, you could have already done this in the MDA views or in all the different views where you could do multidimensional filtering, like show me all the HTTP posts with a particular response code where the number of service calls or the number of database calls exceed a certain amount, and then even filter further on a particular URL. This was an ad hoc option and an ad hoc query. Now you can also create calculated service metrics, so you can actually create dashboards like this. Hey, on the top left, what are the requests? What are the endpoints that make the most database calls? What are the ones that are the slowest? What are failed requests split by HTTP code? So there's a lot of new possibilities now that you have, because you can kind of frame and use this query language almost to define new calculated metrics. Calculated metrics means this is going to be available as time series data. You can chart it, and as you will also later on see, you can even define custom alerts on it, right? And obviously Davis will also then include these metrics as part of the root cause analysis. So that's also great. I think this is one of the last examples that I have before I jump into how does really do it. But I wanted to include all these use cases because these are the use cases you have brought to us. So I'm a big advocate for using Dynatrace in continuous delivery, in continuous performance testing. So I told you over the years, please use the load testing integration that we have, where testing tools can use a particular HTTP header to pass on test step name, test script name, transaction name, and things like that. Dynatrace can extract this context data through what we call request attributes. So now in Dynatrace I can filter and I can say, give me the response time for all the HTTP requests that came in from a particular test step, right? But again, instead of just putting it on these ad hoc multidimensional analysis views, I can now also create a calculated service metric and also chart it. So how does this really work? And I want to highlight now, so as of today, we are end of November 2019. The first thing I'm actually going to show you is a screen that will be available in January. This is just an additional screen we put on top to make this easier, but everything I show you today you can already do with your current Dynatrace Live because the feature, the calculated service metrics, are already available and have been available for many of you through an early adopter program. So if you're part of that early adopter program, you can already do this. Just this one screen will be available in January. So here is how this works. We have a lot of data, but the idea is, and the kind of the way I want to explain it to you, because this is also the way we explained business transactions back in the days when I was still working on AppMon, our previous generation monitoring product. We actually used the analogy of SQL statements. So basically what you are asking for is, give me a particular metric, split it by a certain dimension, and then on top of that only calculate that metric on, let's say, a particular filter criteria. So in this new screen, we have the same thing. You select a metric, response time, failure rate, number of database calls, revenue, whatever it is. Then you can split it by a dimension, request name, URL, loyalty status of a customer, database statement, endpoint, whatever it is. And additionally, a criteria. Do you want to have this metric calculated for a particular service? Do you want to have it calculated for a particular management zone? Do you want to have it calculated for particular services that match a particular tag, right? Let's say for a particular project. So you can define all this. You will see it immediately in the screen. This is the ad hoc. But then you can also click on Create Metric, and this will then actually create the metric automatically for you. And what it actually does behind the scenes, and this is what every one of you can already do also as of today, if you're part of that early adopter program already, and I know many of you are, you can just define the same thing that we did nicely in this kind of wizard also through the calculated service metrics definition screen in the settings menu. So the same example again as before. You define the metric, you select from a drop-down list, what's the metric that you're interested in, what do you want to split it by, and what's also really cool here, you can define a dimension value pattern, which means you're not constrained to just one dimension. You can actually combine names of different dimensions. It will still be just one dimension, but the name itself, you can add a string, and you can be very flexible. You can also give it a dimension name, obviously, and as you can see here you can say, Dynatrace, I'm interested in the top 10, the top 50, top 100 values, starting from highest to lowest, and you're very flexible on how you wanna split it. And as I said, you also need to specify a condition. Now, because we don't allow you to calculate every metric for everything, as you know, Dynatrace environments can be huge because we have customers that monitor thousands and thousands of hosts and even more microservices. So you want to be specific, and there's a lot of different conditions, whether it's the service display name, whether it's tags, so you can filter on it. But it's basically the same idea. So what type of metrics do you have? Hopefully the way I came up with this slide explains it a little bit. Remember, what we're talking about is we're looking at a service, let's say in this case, Easy Travel Customer Frontend, and we already get a lot of out-of-box metrics, but now you can basically say, give me a metric, split by dimension, and filter it by something. So what are the different metrics you can actually choose from? There are on the one side the classical metrics that I would assume you would expect anyway, response time, request count, and you can see it here, exception count. So for instance, I want to have the exception count of requests that go to that service. But besides those that are kind of coming in on the caller side, right? If you call that service, we measure response time on how long it took actually for the Easy Travel Customer Frontend to respond, or how many exceptions have we seen within this service, or what's the failure rate of the requests. What we also have on the other side are metrics that are kind of going into the next layer of your architecture. So for instance, number of database calls. You can actually say, I want to know as a metric the number of database calls that my service is making, or the time spent in making the database calls, or the number of calls to other depending services. Right? These are additional metrics you have. Also, the metrics on the top right, where it says client-side metrics, these are basically metrics when Easy Travel calls another service. Then you can actually say, hey, I want to know, let's say, the response time of a particular service as I perceive it as customer frontend, right? Or, give me the HTTP 400s when my Easy Travel customer frontend makes a call to a backend service, and this service returns HTTP 400 or 500. These are the metrics on the top right. Additional metric in the middle now request attributes. So if you are capturing any business context information, either as HTTP headers, parameters, cookies, method arguments, return values, these are request attributes, and those attributes that actually return a number can also be used as metric, right? You can say, I want a chart, give me the revenue, or give me the, I don't know what other metric, revenue just comes to mind. As a classical example, right? Good, so these are the metrics we have available. And I can see people are asking questions. That's great. If you joined later, you can ask your questions through the question feature and go to webinar. I will answer them in a second. So these are the metrics you have available. And then on the bottom, you can specify, okay, how do you want to split it? And this is not the full list of all the options, but it's, I would say, a very common one. Well, let's say the most common ones that I think people will use, whether it's request name, request type, URL host, and all these things, right? So want to show you some examples now. And this is where I actually go into the product. So I want to show you how you can set up a request to say, give me the response time for the top URLs, give me the response time, or give me the number of database invocations per URL. So I want to see my top URLs and the number of invocations, the top URLs by service invocation. So remember, we always differentiate between calling a database service and calling a regular service. Then my example with test step names. So if you're integrating Dynatrace with your testing tool, how can you actually define a calculated service metrics to say, give me response time per test step name. And the last one is revenue by loyalty status. All right. If you download the slides later on, in the slides itself, you will see that I actually have screenshots of all of these metrics here, so you can actually redo it yourself in case you don't want to watch the whole presentation. All right, let me go in. This is now my, I have two environments. I have two Dynatrace environments, and this is, I think, also when I cut my video stream. I just want to make sure that you have enough real estate here. So I got two Dynatrace environments. The one that is actually running Easy Travel with some load on it. And as you can see here, I have already created these metrics before so that I actually have some historical view and data. But I also want to show you how you can create it yourself. Okay, so the easiest way, and I will create the first one through the new wizard. It's going to be one of the entry points will be under diagnostic tools, multidimensional analysis. So let me create this one here. I create a metric. Let's say, I think I said request response time. I want to have the response time split by request name. That's a good one. Why request name versus URL? Request name is the actual request name that also includes and factors in all of your custom request naming rules. I think that's actually if you were dealing and if you thought about how you configure Dynatrace to not only use your URLs, which is the default request name, but if you have your custom request naming rules, then I think this is a great dimension to filter. Now here you can see I get an immediate overview. I also get the results. Now I can filter it additionally where I say I only want to have it for particular, let's say, services. I could do two things. In that list on the bottom, I can click, let's say, on the Easy Travel customer front end. And what you will then see, now I am in the multidimensional analysis view and I'm actually filtering it already on this particular service, right? So that means this is you have to have at least one filter in there, and this is now filtering on that service. Additionally, I could filter here as well. I could say only where the HTTP, let's say, method is get, right? So that would be an option. So you have all the flexibility here. If you're done, then you can create a metric. Here you need to give it a metric name. That's the logical metric name, and I call this now, what do I call it? Response time by request name for Easy Travel, okay? You can see the top dimensions. Now if I would click on create metric, it will automatically create the metric and I'm done. I want to show you, however, what actually happens behind the scenes, because this wizard is really just creating the configuration. And I could have also started here, and this is now kind of looking behind the scenes, or like what most of you can do already today as of November. If you have the, if you're part of the early adopter program, then you have this capability already available. That means you can go to your settings and you can go to server-side, and I think in your case it might be called service metrics. In my build it's already renamed to calculated service metrics, which is the final name. But this is where you actually now see the underlying definition. So you have a name. The metric will later on get a unique metric key that we can use for the API, because you can query all these metrics all through the API. See here again, I mean, I'll keep it with the one I selected earlier, response time, but these are all the metrics that you have available. I showed it to you earlier. Right? Now, conditions. This one is already filtered for a particular service, so that would already be good enough because you need to at least filter it on either tags or management zone or an individual service. I additionally specified this condition here as well, HTTP method, and you can see here you're extremely flexible. You have so many things here that you can filter on. It can be very specific. I'll keep it to this here. And then on the split dimension, right, it splits on request name. This is completely open. You can do whatever you want here, but probably it makes most sense to say request name. Maybe additionally, you could do something like, what did I say earlier? Request, not type, what was it, the HTTP method. Right? We could then do something like this, even though in this case it would always be get. But you can see here that you're very flexible with the name of the dimension. Right? So it's similar to what we have with the request attributes. You can specify something very dynamic here. Dimension name, I just give this a better name. I just call this the endpoint. Okay, and then I say give me the top 10, and that's great. And then I save the metric. All right, good. Let's see. Saving. Here we go. That's it, right? It's as easy as that. Let me show you a couple of the others that I've created earlier. I think the one HTTP 400 per, no, sorry, which one? The one that we just did was RT by request name. This is the one we just created. I also created one earlier, the top database requests. Let me show you this one. I call it top DB requests. This is the API key. It's based on the number of calls to the database. In this case, the condition was on services that contain the name Easy Travel. So for all of my services that contain that name, it also shows me for how many services this metric will actually be calculated. So that's important because there's going to be licensing costs as well for this, as you can see here. And then again, the dimension. Right? Let me show you a couple of others. The revenue by loyalty, that's an interesting one. Right? So here, I called it revenue by loyalty. The metric source is one of the request attributes. It's actually the Easy Travel amount. I was capturing this through a request attribute and capturing this for a particular service. Again, condition, I only calculated for my booking service, so for services that have booking in the name. And then what I do, I split it by loyalty status, which is another request attribute. So that's actually pretty cool, right? So if you're looking at the dashboards, let me show you. So what do I have here? I have revenue by loyalty status. Right, both. This is the same chart basically, just a different chart type. One with a pie chart, one with a bar chart over time, revenue by loyalty, and then also the number of database calls. And then on the bottom here, I have the top requests by URL. Okay, and if I go in quickly and show you, let's say the top, or let's actually add a new one. Let's add a new chart. Configure it. So now I can do my top requests. Right? I use the metric that I created earlier. Why? Because I have more historical data because I created that metric in the morning. So I see that overview. That's great. Now I can additionally filter because when I set up this metric, it's been calculated for all of my services that have Easy Travel in its name. So I can, again, filter on, let's say, a particular service. Right, that's great. Oh, actually, this one doesn't have anything. Let's see which one I do here. Let's do filter by service, Easy Travel, web server. Go. Right, and then I could even say I only want to have those where the requests start with /blog. Right, and then so you're completely free here to. Oh, come on. There we go. To chart this. All right. So you can see here a lot of options. You can obviously. This is not starting with. It's just a. It's just a contains. All right. And then let's say top requests on Easy Travel web server, and then top list. Now I got my top list, and then I update my dashboard tile. And here I am. All right, so that's pretty cool. The other thing that I wanted to show you is on my other tenant. This is where I actually have Captain running. So Captain, in my case, takes care of deploying and automatically testing my microservices, and I have a staging and a production environment, and tests will be executed. So what I've set up here, there's a couple of things that I've set up. The first thing that I've set up, I have under server-side monitoring, I have request attributes. So here I'm actually, this is the load testing integration that we have, LSN, LTN, and TSN. So this is where my testing tool is actually adding an additional HTTP header on the request, giving me the test name or the transaction name or the script name. So this is what needs to be configured, and if you want to see the details, this is all explained in the documentation. That means what I can do, if I go to my service in this case, right, I could go and click on a few dynamic requests. And as you know, I'm sure for those of you that have done this integration in the past with request attributes, I see the URLs here on the top request, and on the request attributes, I now have my individual request attributes with all the different dimensional values. Again, the question is, how can I create a custom calculated metric? Let's say that splits by TSN. So now I can shortcut again, click here, create chart. With the new build, again, that becomes available in January, you will automatically get into the screen, right? And now I can actually, sorry, this is actually the old screen. I was hoping to go into the new screen. I guess this one is not. No, I'll show you the other way around. I can do this here because this is my live tenant. I should have thought about this. So I'm just doing it the way you would also do it in your case if you have the early adopter program turned on. So you go to server-side metrics, I go to service metrics, right? And I say create new service metric. I call it, let's say, let's do the response time by test name. I say response time split by, that's my request attribute step name, test step name, TSN. I call the dimension test name, so just give it a nice logical name. And then I also add a condition here, and I say I want to do this on, in my case, on all of my services where I have a particular tag on it. So for instance, I'm running, as I mentioned earlier, I'm using Captain for my deployment. So I can say on all the services where the tag Captain project is on, right? Because this tag is going to be specified by Captain in my case. Then I chose me all the affected services, so I will get this metric calculated for my prod and my staging environment, my blue, green, and all that stuff. I click on Save Metric, and now this metric is available. Now again, this is a new metric that I just created. It means from now on, metrics will be calculated. I created a similar metric earlier that was called test step response time. Let me show you this one here, because I really should see some historical data, but it's basically the same thing. I say, give me the response time, but only for those requests. Actually, this makes a lot of sense, where the TSM, this request attribute, is actually on the request, also only for the Captain project in my case, and then split by TSM. That's it. And now I think in my dashboard, I also have it here. I have on the top left a chart that shows me the top 10 response times split by the name of the test, in this case invoke. Right? If you want to see the details here, I can click on it, edit. Then you can see I'm really just charting the metric that was called test step response time. I see all of them. I could additionally filter on it. I can say I'm only interested, let's say, in a particular Captain project, like the simple project, and not all of my Captain projects. And then maybe only in staging. And then, so the filtering also works on this, and I think this is really great because the metrics itself, they also have the metadata about, which services they were calculated for. All right, and then I can say update tile, and then maybe I just say test for staging. Update dashboard tile, and that's it, right? So that's pretty cool. All right, I see questions are coming in, and I will come to this right at the end of the presentation. Let me just swap this here quickly. So this is what I have just shown you. We talked about the top URLs, the top databases, the top service invocations, and so on. As I mentioned, the slides will be uploaded to Dynatrace University. And for all of these 5 examples, I have screenshots where I again show what was the metric that I used, what was the condition, and what was the split. Right? So this is basically, it just shows just for you if you are looking at the slides later on. You don't want to watch the whole video. Now, next topic is charting and alerting. I think I already showed you how to chart things. So the metrics are just available as any other metric, including the dimensions, and you can filter on the entities where the metric comes from, but also you can filter on the individual dimensions. One thing that I thought is pretty cool, and I wanted to also give a shout out to the team that worked on the custom alerts. So you can also now create custom alerts based on these calculated metrics. So here's an example. If you, for instance, have a database-heavy application and you want to get an alert in case a particular endpoint has a particular spike in database calls after, let's say, a deployment or a feature flag you turn on. So now you can actually create a custom alert. You select your metric. You can even, as I said, filter it on a particular dimension, in this case only for the booking endpoint. Then in the custom alerts, you get the overview, the historical overview of what is the data that Dynatrace already has. And then Dynatrace already gives you a recommendation on what the threshold should be based on historical data. And then you can fine-tune and then also immediately see how many alerts you would get with this particular tuning. And as you can see, event description, you can here also include placeholders. If you want to learn more about this, there's a great blog post from Wolfgang Baer that he wrote on custom alerts. What I wanted to make sure is that you understand you can also create these custom alerts based on your metrics. And let me just show you quickly how this looks in the product. So if I go to my environment that has a little more data, I could go to settings, I can go to anomaly detection, custom events for alerting. This is where I have my DB spam. Let me just create a new one. I call it, what's your new revenue alert? Maybe that's actually fun. Revenue alert. And I say the metric is revenue because I believe I have my revenue by loyalty. So maybe you want to have an alert in case there is a gold status member coming in. And here you see the historical data now of how much revenue my loyalty users have generated. And now I can say I want to get alerted, in case either above or below a certain threshold, right? So that's actually, I just came up with this, but I think that actually makes a lot of sense, right? So, and then you can say, OMG, we are making so much money. Let's book a trip to perform in Vegas because we want to learn how we can even make more money, right? So that's actually a little commercial to our Perform conference that is coming up, all right? In case you haven't yet booked your tickets. All right, so that's this here, right? Pretty cool. You can also use this for custom alerts. Now let me quickly, I think I did the demo, that's good. Now last part, I want to talk about automation. All the stuff that I just showed you is also available through an API. That means you can create, you can update, you can delete your calculated metric definitions. And I just highlighted this here in a very easy way. It should be very straightforward. There's documentation. You can look at the Swagger UI and just get all the details So create, update, delete is all here. Another one is obviously you can query the data through the actual data that is generated and calculated through the metrics API. Here, a slight kind of heads up. There was a lot of feedback that came in on the current version, and there will be a final change on that GET API that is targeted for January 2020. What I can encourage you to do though is please make sure to check out what's possible, because this query API, this metrics API is extremely powerful, because you can do a lot of cool things about retrieving multiple metrics, executing filters. You can define the scope, timeframes, and all that stuff. And I think this is really powerful. Let me quickly just show you in case you've never played around with the API. So if you want to play around with the API, and I go to my other environment here, then under settings, right, under integration, Dynatrace API, this is where you can create your tokens. And with this token, you can then also open up the API Explorer, which brings you to the Swagger API, right? This is here. So this is now the Swagger API. And the thing that I highlighted under the environment API v1, actually, sorry, not this one, it's the configuration API. Under the configuration API, you have under service, where are they? Why am I not seeing them? Environment. Metrics. Why am I just so blind right now? Let me just double check this here. Metrics. Here we go, service metrics. It's the configuration API. Here we go. In the configuration API, under service metrics, this is where you have your get, your post, your put, your delete. This is where you can really automate the creation or update of these calculated service metrics. Very easy to use, right? I executed this earlier. I just said, give me all my calculated service metrics, and let me just try this out again and execute, and then you get back basically the list of metrics, and you can see here all the custom calculated metrics start with calc. So that's the calculated metric, and you can then take this one to actually query data. It means, how can you query data? You can query data through the environment v2. So here is the metrics API that you can use to query data, and this is the one I think that is extremely powerful. Where, here we go. This is where you can select a particular metric, and you can also specify time frame, and you can also specify the scope. So you can be very descriptive on which metric you want, in which aggregation, for which time frame, and also for which particular tags. And there's a really rich description in the documentation about the metrics API selector and transformation. So this is where you can actually, you can see how you specify, different aggregations. So with a single query, you can get average, min, max, and also you can also get percentiles. I think one interesting one is filtering on dimensions. So you can also say, I want to have, let's say, the response time metric only for a particular test, because I know there's a test name dimension. So this is all possible. So check this out. Now, last, before I go to the questions, actually brings me to one of the early adopters of this API, which is our Captain Quality Gates capability. So what Captain, our open source project, does is it implements quality gates, and it actually follows the let's say the best practice or good practice, or let's say the terminology of using SLIs and SLOs. So in Captain, you can define so-called service level indicators. As you can see here, this is in my environment. I have a list of, I think, in total of 8 different SLIs. The first 5 are the let's say, built-in metrics, throughput, error rate, response time, and then I've added 3 additional calculated ones, like count service calls invoke. And when what you specify, you really specify the query that you want Captain to execute against Dynatrace, which is great because you have all the flexibility, as I said earlier, like the filters. If you look at the count service calls invoke, I basically say, Captain, I would like you to query the top URL service calls. That's the metric that returns the top URLs that make the service calls. And then I also want to filter on a particular endpoint. So I don't want to have it for all of my URLs, but let's say just for my API invoke. So we specify that query. Then Captain also has the concept of an SLO, a service level objective, where I can specify what should happen with these queries, with these SLIs, which ones are important for me, which ones should not only be queried and given to me informational, like what's the value after a build or after a test, but you can also specify some with a pass and warning criteria where you can either specify a static threshold or even a percentage where it then gets compared with the previous, let's say, quality gate run. And then at the end, when you run it, you also get the overview of, okay, what were the actual values of every single metric, of every single SLI, and I highlighted those. Let's say response time. It actually says pass here, and if you click on it, you get the actual value that was measured and actually why it passed. It passed because it was faster than 600 milliseconds, but it was also faster than the compared build, the previous one, because I specified it has to be, it must not be slower than 10% of the previous value. Okay, so this is all done by Captain, and it all happens through the APIs. If you want to learn more about this, there's a GitHub repo out there that I'm currently curating where I show the Captain quality gates. And what's also interesting, even if you don't use Captain right now, all of these scripts are out there that actually create these custom metrics for you, these calculated metrics, because I try to automate as much as possible. So have a look at my shell scripts there so you can actually see how you can automate most of the stuff. All right. Now, let me go through what's next. So what's next? In January 2020, we will have the multidimensional analysis view that I showed you that kind of makes the creation of these metrics easier, available for everyone. Also, the metrics v2 API to query data will get the final kind of version and will also be available in January. The current version is obviously going to be supported, and I think they told me until the end of Q1, but eventually the final version, the GA version, will have some final changes. Also, these metrics that you define, they obviously generate time series data which needs to be stored, and here I want you to watch out for a blog that is coming out from Thorsten Roth, one of our product managers, and he's going to explain the concept of DDUs, data units, which we use to actually, price and calculate, the costs actually what you owe us. Now, the next thing, and that's something new for me that I've never tried, I want to give you the chance now to vote on what are the things that you would like to see next. I talked with the product team, and they gave me 6 of the points that they are currently having in the backlog after this version, and they said, well, give your users the chance to actually vote. So if you click on that link, that Slido 1502, I created that live poll. You should be able to tell me what your most interesting next enhancement would be. And to give a quick overview, the first one means horizontal aggregation of existing metrics across the service flow. So right now, if you define a custom metric, it's basically a metric that we can see on that particular service, let's say the number of database calls that service makes. But what if you want to have the total number of database calls across the whole end-to-end service flow? So this is something that they are thinking of, like what they call it a horizontal aggregation of existing metrics. Existing are response time, number of database calls, number of service calls, number of failed requests. Then the second one is the same thing but applied to request attributes. So request attributes is something that you extract from your business data, let's say from an HTTP parameter. Let's say an example would be, give me the total revenue that we can extract from a backend system, but make it available on the front-end service, because we want to split it by front-end URL. Okay, that's the second thing. The third one is application as a dimension. Fourth, topology as a dimension. Here, basically allowing you to say, I want to split my metrics by application context or by topology, which means, you know, on things like a service instance, a process group instance, a host, and something like that, anything on the topology. The fifth, split by metadata from the topology. So if you're doing blue-green deployments and if you are deciding to have one service and your blue and green, you differentiate them on the PGI layer, process group instance layer, and you have the metadata on the PGI telling you this is blue and this is green, then you will, with this capability, you would be able to say, I want to have response time split by a particular piece of metadata that tells me about blue or green or A and B or canary or primary that is part of the PGI. And the last one, bucketizing of metric ranges. So right now, if you say, I want to have the response time, but you can actually say, I don't want to have the response time as a value, but I want to have it as a bucket. So you would be able to define value ranges, and instead of saying 100 milliseconds or 500 milliseconds or a second as value that comes back, you would be able to say, please give me response time okay, warning, or severe. And you know, obviously there's different value ranges, but it's about bucketizing. All right. Actually, let me leave this up, and I want to make sure you guys see the link. So I want to now give you the chance to vote for it, and I will feed this back to the product team. So now questions. Let's make sure you are seeing the Q&A feature. So there's a question box in GoToWebinar. The first question that comes in, when will this feature be available for customers who did not participate in the EAP? That is January. In January, all of this will be available for everyone out there, okay? So all the calculated service metrics and also the new APIs, they will all be available in January. When will it be available for SaaS environments? I guess, again, if you want to participate in the early adopter program, you can already have access to it. Otherwise, again, January would be the time. See, let me know if you have any other questions that you may have. These are the two questions. So there's a question feature. Slides, yes, slides will be available on university.dynatrace.com, and the recording will be available on YouTube. All right, so what do I need to make, next question is, what do I need to make these REST calls? Okay, so REST calls, I think I showed this quickly earlier. You need an API token, so you generate a token, and then you can open up your, like I did earlier, your API Explorer, which means basically your REST API, your Swagger UI. And then in the Swagger UI, you have full access to all the different endpoints. It's great to play around with it. And actually, let me just quickly do one query here. This is my live environment. And I think I'm already, I just need to, I thought I had it somewhere here already authorized, because I don't want to show everyone my keys. Here we go. This one is authorized. And I think I'm also authorized here. Yeah, there we go. So if I do a get metric, and it's great, it actually kept my example from earlier. So here I say, give me the service response time, the 95th percentile. You can give a certain time frame, right? Either a timestamp, or you can also work with these convenient minutes, hours, days, and weeks. And then you can also specify scopes. So in this case, I'm basically specifying, give me the response time only for those services where the tag captain project says simple project, and so on and so forth. and then I can execute it, and then here what comes back is the response, right? So that's an easy example here. Next question, do you know if process group instance will be an option for service metric splitting? So this is the this requirement here, the split by metadata, actually sorry, split by topology. This is what they have already planned, where you can then split metrics on anything around the topology of the service. So you could go down to process group instance, process group, and I would assume maybe even down to the host level, which would allow you to do anything. You use any type of, yeah, you can then split this, Josh. All right. Let's see. Make sure to vote. Let me then quickly go to the next slide. As a reminder, while I'm waiting for more questions, we still have 5 minutes to go. So there is a lot of material out there on the web. So make sure to check out the different performance clinics, the different events, the university. There's a lot of great material out there, the coffee breaks, the power demos, and also the podcast. And as I said earlier in the demo already, Perform is coming up. Perform Las Vegas, this is your chance. And the great thing about Perform this year is we have 2 days of hot days, 2 training days, Monday afternoon and evening, and then Tuesday during the day. So go to register, select your hot days, and then we have 2 days of regular conference track. Okay, so this is your chance to learn this hands-on. And I know that a lot of people have already registered, so make sure that you're fast and you're not missing the a slot on those training days that you actually want to participate in. Okay, so that would be great. Good. While I'm waiting here for another question, I think what I want to do is I want to go back to my environment here, and I just want to show you another cool thing, so this is not the version that you will all have available in January. If you go to one of your services, customer front end, and let me make this bigger, full screen, few dynamic requests, and then from the service, create chart. Now hopefully this now brings me to the new view, right? So that means this brings me directly to the multidimensional analysis view. And what I like about this, you can play around with it, right? I can say I want to see the number of time, or the number of time spent in calling out of services, and I want to split it by the URL, but maybe I only want to see it for HTTP posts, because I know these are my my heavy hitting endpoints, like in this case orange booking and so on and so forth. Then create a metric, call it let's say backend time in backend service per front-end endpoint. I'm very creative here with the name. Remember, I could click create, but I click on advanced options, because that brings me now to the configuration screen. You could also start here if you want to, but I find the new MDA, the Multidimensional Analysis wizard, really cool. So same thing. The only thing that I noticed, and that's what my own personal preference, and maybe they will change this at some point. I really like my split by dimension request name. That's great, but the dimension name, I rather say this is maybe my endpoint. I get rid of the curly brackets and so on, and then save the metric. Right, and now I have this metric again from now on. Yeah. Next one, do I need to create a custom calculated metric to be able to put new dimensional analysis to the dashboard? Exactly. So if you wanna chart something, if you wanna put something on a dashboard, or if you wanna query the data through the REST API, you create and define a calculate service metric, right? And you have You have all the possibilities. You can filter on so many things. You can split on all the different metadata, and then these metrics become available, and you can put them on a chart. You can do whatever you want with it. But yes, you need to create calculated service metrics. Awesome. All right. Last but not least, I want to show you. I told you that I have this this repo here. So the cap quality gate example, and what I put in there is a couple of scripts. Well, I go through the whole use case of setting up Captain, and Captain is doing the deployment, and is then executing tests, and is then querying the data. But if you are interested, then here are in the quality gates subfolder. This is where I have these SLIs specified, including all these queries. Right, so I think this might be good for you to get an idea of what's possible. Also, what I have in here is under the Dynatrace folder a couple of scripts that actually create some of these metrics. So I created this script here that is just making a curl basically, right? And I'm building together this payload, and then you can call this function with calculate metric. You give it a name, like give it a key, a name. What's the metric you want to get? What's the unit, and so on and so forth. You can also specify conditions, and then at the end, what do you want to split it by? How do you want to have it aggregated? So there's a lot of, you can have a look at this particular script here that hopefully will make it easier for you to get started with automation. Okay. All right. Cool. With that, I want to say again thank you to Denise, who is always recording. Thanks for the audience. Thanks for participation. Give us feedback. Make sure you are hitting that URL with the poll. Right? It's this one here, Slido 1502. I have it open for another couple of hours. So in case you watch this offline, you may not be able to get there anymore. But this would be great if you give us feedback on what of these features you would love to see in upcoming iterations of the product. And I hope to see you all in Perform. That would be great. Go to let's see each other in Vegas. Okay. Thank you. Bye bye.